Welcome back to Goosebump on the Midnight series, where the most terrifying haunted stories are told. Today, we have a new story for you, titled Lament of the Waning Moon. Let's listen together and see where the story leads and how it ends on today's Horror Stories channel. Please support the channel by like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment with your thoughts on the story and its ending. Share this video with your friends and family. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling horror story. Thank you all for your support. The bus groaned, laboring over Collier's Pass, leaving the city of Blackwood County to dissolve in the evening mist behind it. The old vehicle screeched a doleful, metallic protest with every turn, like an ancient beast forcing out its final breaths on the treacherous mountain road. Arthur Vance gently pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the window, feeling every jolt as the bus navigated the dangerous hairpin turns. The chill from the pain seeped into his skin, piercing through his thin wool sweater and making him shiver. But that cold was nothing compared to the iciness coiling deep within his soul. Outside, the magnificent landscape of the northern border mountains unfolded before him in a vast, primordial expanse of deep green. Jagged limestone ranges, sharp as giant blades, stabbed at the silver-gray sky. Mist drifted lazily, clinging to ancient trees, creating a colossal watercolor painting that was both breathtakingly beautiful and eerily silent. It had been 7 years since he'd last returned. 7 years. A period long enough for a child to grow, for a city to transform, and long enough for the memories of his hometown to fade into blurry patches in Arthur's mind. 7 long years in Europe, spent among the ancient libraries of Paris, the solemn halls of the Sorbonne, and in lively academic debates on the structuralism of myth, had reduced his home to a faded watercolor hanging in a dark corner of his mind. He had grown accustomed to the smell of old paper and roasted coffee, more familiar with the sounds of French and English than his own mother tongue. His world had become one of distant legends, the rituals of African tribes, and the tales of Norse gods. He had tried to forget this place. Arthur wasn't returning for a summer vacation, nor was he fleeing a roadblock in his doctoral thesis on the shamanic rituals of the region's native peoples. In fact, his thesis was progressing very well. His professors all praised his findings and his fresh perspective. He was returning for a much simpler reason, one he couldn't refuse, an invisible but unbreakable cord that pulled him back to the place he had tried so hard to escape, the 70th birthday celebration of his father, Richard Vance. In their transcontinental call a few weeks ago, his mother Eleanor's voice was as sweet and insistent as ever. Her voice traveled thousands of miles, carrying with it the scent of expensive Chanel perfume and a subtle, manipulative control. "You have to come home, son. Your father misses you terribly. It's been so long since the whole family was together. Besides, he has something important to announce." There was a slight hesitation in her voice that Arthur, with the sensitivity of someone accustomed to analyzing linguistic nuances, could detect. A tiny pause, no longer than a breath, but enough to plant a seed of suspicion in his mind. But he quickly dismissed it. It was probably just business. He had never truly cared for such things. Arthur's world was one of words, of myths, of ancient chants and folk songs. It was afternoons spent alone in the St. Genevieve Library, turning the pages of ancient books, feeling the soul of the past. His father's world, and that of his older brother Julian, was one of numbers, growth charts, and multi-million-dollar contracts. Theirs were sleepless nights tracking the stock market, lavish parties with business partners whose smiles never reached their eyes. The two worlds existed in parallel within one family, like two lines that would never intersect. Arthur was a deliberate outcast. He didn't rebel or argue. He simply and quietly chose a different path, a path his father deemed fanciful and unprofitable. He chose to study folklore partly to escape the immense shadow of his father and the expectation to take over the family business. The shadow of a man who had single-handedly built an empire and expected his sons to be worthy princely heirs. His family was rich. Very rich. The name Vance Pharmaceuticals was famous not just in Blackwood County, but across the entire country. They had started from a small herbal extract facility, tucked away modestly in a city alley. Arthur still remembered the pungent, acrid smell of medicinal herbs that clung to his clothes and permeated his childhood dreams. Then, the business took off like a rocket after launching a product line called Serenity King, extracted from rare herbs found only in this mountain region. Serenity King. The name sounded so grand, so powerful. It had brought the Vance family immense wealth, a sprawling villa secluded on a hill overlooking the valley, expensive cars, and an invisible power that could influence many things in this provincial county. Arthur enjoyed this wealth passively, as if it were a given. He studied in France, lived a comfortable life, all thanks to the dark brown capsules named Serenity King. He never once asked himself where its true origins lay. He only knew it was the result of his father's vision and acumen. At least, that's what he always said. The bus stopped at the head of the asphalt road leading into the valley. No other public transport went further. Arthur had to take a motorcycle taxi for nearly 10 more kilometers. The driver, a local man from the valley whose face was weathered by sun and wind, became talkative after learning he was Richard Vance's younger son. He had a friendly smile and teeth stained yellow from smoking a water pipe. "Been a long time since we've seen you, Mr. Arthur. You back for good this time, or just visiting?" "Just for my father's birthday celebration," Arthur replied with a slight, strained smile. He didn't know how to explain his life to this man. "Well, that makes sense. Seems like there's a lot going on up at your place these days. See trucks carrying goods in and out all day long." The man paused, skillfully slowing down for a large pothole, then lowered his voice, whispering as if afraid the passing wind might hear. "But has anything strange been happening up there lately, sir?" Arthur was a bit surprised. "Strange how?" "Well, the folks who work up there say they hear a lullaby at night. In the old native tongue. It's so sad. Full of sorrow and resentment. Chills you to the bone. A few of the faint-hearted ones have already quit." Arthur frowned. As a cultural researcher, he was immediately intrigued. A lullaby? In the old native dialect? Could it be some form of folk performance he hadn't known about? Or a variation of the ritual chants he had yet to study in depth? "It's probably just the locals singing," Arthur offered, trying to find a logical explanation. The driver shook his head vigorously, his old, worn cap wobbling. "No, sir, it's not like that. The lullaby has no source. It's everywhere. In the wind, in the bushes, sometimes it sounds like it's right beside your ear. It's terrifying. People say it's the voice of a forest spirit. This land is sacred, you know. Maybe your family's business has disturbed something." Arthur remained silent, not arguing. He knew the mountain folk were prone to believing in supernatural tales. For them, the line between the physical and spiritual realms was thin. They lived alongside the spirits of the mountains, the rivers, the trees. He saw it as a fascinating cultural trait, a subject for research, not a truth to be believed. "It's probably just the wind howling through the mountain passes, or someone who likes to sing at night," he told himself. His scientific mind quickly filed the story away under local legends. The motorcycle turned onto a private road paved with smooth flagstones, flanked by 2 rows of towering camphor trees. The sharp, aromatic scent of camphor leaves filled the air, a familiar smell of wealth and distinction. At the end of the road, the Vance family villa appeared, massive and somewhat out of place amidst the mountain wilderness. It was designed in a neoclassical style, with Roman columns, stark white plaster statues, and a meticulously manicured European-style garden. A gaudy display of wealth, a desperate attempt to impose Western order and luxury onto the wild beauty of the northern mountains. His father had always wanted to prove his success with something grand, something that stood apart from the rustic simplicity of its surroundings. To Arthur, it looked like a lavish tumor growing on the simple body of the forest. His mother, Eleanor, was already waiting on the porch. She wore a jade-green silk dress, her hair styled in an elegant updo, a string of lustrous pearls around her neck. She was still beautiful, a beauty carefully maintained by money and leisure. She threw her arms around Arthur, cooing, "My son, you're back. You're so thin. Was the trip exhausting?" Her embrace was a little tighter than usual, and the familiar scent of Chanel No. 5 seemed unable to mask a certain unease. "I'm fine, Mom," Arthur said, trying to sound cheerful. "Come inside. Your father is waiting in the study. Julian and Clara just arrived, too." Arthur stepped inside. Cool air from the air conditioner hit his face, carrying the warm, woody scent of sandalwood from the expensive furniture. The polished marble floor reflected the light from a giant crystal chandelier hanging in the center of the foyer. Everything was the same, immaculate, luxurious, and cold. A heavy silence hung in the air, as if the house itself were holding its breath. He passed by the indoor conservatory, a glass-enclosed space for exotic plants, his mother's pride and joy. Arthur suddenly stopped. This place, usually a paradise of vibrant colors, now looked strange. The imported rose bushes and phalaenopsis orchids, always meticulously cared for, were now scraggly and withered. Many plants had yellowed, drooping leaves, as if drained of life, and the few remaining flowers had a fragile, sickly beauty. A few pots held completely dead plants, just bare, blackened stems, even though Arthur knew they were tended by the most professional gardeners. "What happened to the garden, Mom?" Arthur asked. A flicker of confusion crossed Eleanor's face. She glanced quickly at the garden, her eyes betraying a hint of fear. "Oh. It must be the weather. We've had a lot of frost lately. I had someone look at it, but nothing worked. It's so strange." She changed the subject quickly, pulling Arthur's arm toward the study. "Come on, go see your father. He's been waiting for you." Arthur didn't press further, but a vague sense of unease crept into his mind. That feeling, combined with the motorcycle driver's story, struck a discordant note in the symphony of his homecoming. A dying garden and a resentful lullaby. Two seemingly unrelated details that together hinted at something abnormal. Richard Vance's study was at the end of the hallway, its intricately carved mahogany door always closed. It was his sanctuary, a place no one entered without permission. A place filled with books on business, management, and the ancient medical texts he collected. The door was unlocked. Arthur pushed it open gently and stepped inside. Mr. Vance was sitting in a large leather armchair, his back to the door, looking out the large window that overlooked the entire valley. Even at 70, his back was straight, his posture still exuding an oppressive authority. His broad shoulders cast a shadow on the floor like a small mountain. "Dad," Arthur said softly. Mr. Vance turned. The chair swiveled in a slow, silent arc. His face was deeply etched with the wrinkles of age, his salt and pepper hair impeccably groomed. But his eyes were still bright and sharp, the eyes of a man accustomed to seeing through people and giving orders. A rare smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Arthur. You're back. Good." That was his way of speaking. Concise, sparing with words, but every word carried weight. His brother, Julian, was lounging on the sofa, with his young, beautiful wife, Clara, beside him like a decorative vase. Julian, 5 years Arthur's senior, was the spitting image of their father, but with an added layer of arrogance and condescension. He smirked, a smile Arthur always found laced with mockery. "Look who's back, the esteemed scholar. Thought you were off chasing ghosts somewhere." The familiar jab, a way for him to assert his position as the heir apparent against his useless younger brother. "I came back for Dad's birthday," Arthur replied, trying to ignore the provocation. Clara gave Arthur a slight nod, her smile somewhat forced. She wore an expensive designer dress and elaborate makeup, but it couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes and her weary, haggard expression. She sat close to Julian, her hands unconsciously wringing her fingers. The family conversation was hardly joyful. It felt more like a board meeting than a reunion. Mr. Vance asked a few perfunctory questions about Arthur's studies before quickly moving on to the main topic. "I've called you all here not just for my birthday, but for another important matter." Mr. Vance steepled his fingers on the desk. It was his signature gesture when making an irreversible decision. "I've decided to hand over complete control of the company to Julian. Starting next month, he will be the CEO. As for you, Arthur." He looked at Arthur, his gaze scrutinizing. "You may not like business, but you are a Vance. I have arranged a position for you on the board of directors, in charge of research and development based on local culture. It's right in your field of expertise." Arthur froze. The air was sucked out of his lungs. This was what he had always feared. Being shackled to the family's money-making machine. Having his knowledge, his passion, turned into a tool for profit, to serve the empire he had always wanted to escape. "Dad, No arguments." Mr. Vance cut him off, his voice sharp. "This is your responsibility." The word responsibility landed like a hammer blow, slamming shut any door of resistance. The tension in the room thickened. Julian was openly triumphant, his grin widening. Seeing this, Eleanor quickly tried to smooth things over. All right, let's just celebrate for now. We can discuss this later. Let's have a happy family gathering." But no one could be happy anymore. The birthday dinner was held at the most luxurious restaurant in the city. Many guests, officials, business partners, came to offer their congratulations. The entire hall was ablaze with lights and fake smiles. Mr. Vance was in his element, moving from table to table, clinking glasses, accepting praise and expensive gifts. Julian followed his father, mimicking his posture, shaking hands, and smiling with practiced ease. Arthur felt lost amidst the phony socializing. He was like a ghost, drifting through the noisy crowds, no one truly seeing him, or if they did, giving only a cursory nod to the faint shadow beside the illustrious careers of his father and brother. He made an excuse to step out onto the balcony for some fresh air. The chilly mountain night air helped clear his head. Clara followed him out. She stood a short distance away, her hands on the railing, her eyes gazing into the pitch-black night. "You're not used to places like this, are you?" Clara spoke unexpectedly, her voice small and slightly trembling. I prefer quieter spaces, Arthur replied. He was surprised she had initiated a conversation. Since marrying into the Vance family, Clara had rarely spoken to him privately. Clara was silent for a long moment, then she suddenly asked an unrelated question, her voice filled with anxiety. Arthur, do you believe in ghosts? Arthur looked at her, astonished. Clara's large, beautiful eyes were wide with an unconcealable fear. Why do you ask? It's nothing. Clara shook her head, but Arthur could clearly see the terror in her eyes. She clutched her handbag, her knuckles white. It's just, I haven't been sleeping well lately. Every night, around midnight, I hear a lullaby. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. The lullaby again. The motorcycle driver's story suddenly came alive in his mind, no longer just an interesting cultural detail. Where is the singing coming from? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I don't know, Clara said, her voice almost a whisper, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. It just echoes in my ears, like someone is standing right in the room. It's a lullaby in the native dialect, I don't understand the words. But it's so mournful, so full of grief. It makes it hard to breathe. I told Julian, but he just brushed it off, said I've been reading too many novels and I'm making it up. She wrung her hands. I'm so scared, Arthur. In that house, I feel like something else is there with us. Something very sad, and very angry. It doesn't want us there. Before Arthur could say more, Julian stormed out onto the balcony, his face dark. He was tipsy, his eyes bloodshot. What are you doing out here? The guests are asking for you. Get back inside. You're embarrassing me. He shot Arthur a venomous glare, as if Arthur had done something wrong to his wife, then roughly pulled Clara away by the arm. Arthur stood alone on the balcony, his heart heavy. Clara's story, along with everything else he had heard and seen, was weaving together into a terrifying tapestry of doubt. The dying garden, the driver's tale, and now his sister-in-law's panic. All of it revolved around one ghostly detail, a resentful lullaby. His rational mind still tried to dismiss it, but the instincts of someone who had grown up in this land, a researcher of spiritual beliefs, told him something was deeply wrong. That night, the family returned to the villa on the hill late. Julian was dead drunk and had to be helped to his room by Clara and a maid. Mr. Vance and Eleanor, exhausted, also retired to their rooms. The house fell back into its eerie silence. Arthur returned to his old room, where everything had been preserved just as it was 7 years ago. The old literature books, the model airplanes, the academic awards from his school days. Everything evoked a clearer, yet more distant, past. He couldn't sleep. Clara's words haunted him, burrowing deep into his mind. He threw open the window, letting the cold mountain wind rush in. The night outside was thick with darkness, with only the faint, ghostly light of a late-month waning moon hanging over the mountaintop. And then, he heard it. At first, it was just a fleeting sound, as faint as rustling leaves. Arthur thought he was imagining it. But then it grew clearer, closer. A woman's voice, high and clear, but devoid of the warmth of life, was singing a lullaby. The melody was mournful, drawn out, repeating with a monotonous, haunting quality. The language was the old native tongue, the very language Arthur had spent years studying. He could understand every word, every syllable. And their meaning made his blood run cold.
Hush, now. The waning moon leans on the peak. The sacred grove is broken. The wild herbs weep. Hush, now. Roots of sorrow grip the land. A sprout of vengeance rises, to be claimed by human hand.
The melody was heart-wrenchingly tragic and sorrowful. It didn't come from any specific direction. It wasn't from a neighbor's house, or an old radio. It seemed to seep into the air, weaving through the leaves, creeping into his room through the open window. At times, Arthur felt as if it was echoing from the very walls of the house. Arthur felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The scientist in him screamed that this was a hallucination, a product of suggestion from the day's stories. But his ears, and his intuition, told him something else. This was real. The lullaby continued its ghostly refrain, sometimes distant, sometimes near, like a spirit weeping in the silent mountain night. It was telling a story of destruction, of pain, of a debt about to be collected. Arthur shuddered and slammed the window shut. He locked the door and turned on every light in the room. But even sealed off from the outside world, he felt the lullaby was inside his head, boring into his very soul. That night, Arthur didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, the terrible news struck. A truth more horrifying than any nightmare. Arthur was in the dining room, trying to fight off the exhaustion from a sleepless night with a cup of strong coffee, when he heard Clara's blood-curdling scream from upstairs. It tore through the morning quiet, a scream that was no longer human, filled with sheer terror and madness. Arthur and his parents rushed upstairs. The door to Julian and Clara's room was wide open. Clara was collapsed on the floor, her face ashen, her hair a mess. She was trembling uncontrollably, pointing a shaking hand toward the bathroom, her mouth open in a silent, incoherent scream. Mr. Vance and Eleanor rushed in. Arthur stood frozen in the doorway, a terrible premonition rooting his feet to the floor. A few seconds later, Eleanor's agonized shriek echoed out, followed by the sound of something shattering and Mr. Vance's furious cursing. Arthur took a deep breath and forced himself to look inside. And the sight within would haunt him for the rest of his life. Julian Vance was dead. He hadn't died in bed, nor from a stroke induced by alcohol. He was curled up in the empty bathtub, his eyes wide and staring at the ceiling, his face purple and contorted in absolute horror, as if he had seen the most terrifying thing on earth just before he died. But the most horrific part wasn't the death itself. It was his body. All over Julian's body, from his neck to his feet, were deep, bloody scratches, as if he'd been attacked by a wild animal. And from those wounds, tiny, dark brown, damp rootlets were sprouting, piercing through his skin, clinging to his body like a living garment. A few roots even crawled from his gaping mouth and nostrils, twisting and grotesque. They were still squirming, slowly, disgustingly, as if drawing the last vestiges of life from the corpse. The police arrived. They cordoned off the scene. Julian's expensive car was found halfway down a deserted slope, a few kilometers from the villa. It had crashed into a large, old tree by the roadside, the front end lightly dented. The car door was unlocked, and there were no signs of a serious accident. The theory was that Julian had left the car and walked, and then something must have happened to him in the woods. But no one, not even the most seasoned investigators, could explain the roots. They could only vaguely note in the report, "Cause of death undetermined, with abnormal findings." Julian Vance's funeral was held quickly and quietly. A light drizzle fell, making the atmosphere even more somber. His father's face seemed to have aged a decade, hard as stone, his eyes bloodshot but shedding no tears. He was silent, a silence more terrifying than any wail of grief. His mother collapsed, weeping in the arms of relatives. Beside the newly filled grave, Arthur felt more than just the pain of loss. He saw a tangible fear beginning to envelop his family, a dark shadow extending its tendrils. The mournful lullaby from the night before echoed in his head, clear and menacing. A sprout of vengeance rises, to be claimed by human hand. The curse had begun. And this was only the beginning. Julian's death cast a thick, dark shadow over the villa on the hill. It wasn't the ordinary sorrow of loss, but a suffocating atmosphere of fear and ill omen. The house's luxury now seemed garish and out of place. The expensive crystal chandeliers seemed powerless to drive away the darkness gathering in the corners of the rooms. An air of mourning and invisible terror crept into every nook and cranny, more haunting than the cold mountain mist each morning. The household staff began to quit, one by one. The first to leave was the youngest maid, the one who had helped carry Julian to his room that night. She left right after the funeral, forgoing her last month's salary, stammering that every night she dreamed of the young master returning, his body covered in roots, standing at the foot of her bed and staring at her. Soon after, the others followed. They whispered among themselves about the haunted house, the mournful lullaby, and the bizarre death of the eldest son. Their fear was not without reason. The calamities didn't stop there. 3 days after Julian's funeral, a long-serving gardener, who had been with the family since their days at the old production facility, was pruning the camphor tree by the gate when he suddenly fell, breaking both his legs. When he regained consciousness in the hospital, he hysterically recounted that he had felt someone shove him hard from behind, a chilling, invisible push filled with malice. After that incident, no one dared to set foot near the villa. Eleanor completely broke down. The pain of losing her son, coupled with the series of bizarre events, shattered her luxury veneer. She locked herself in her bedroom, where the curtains were now perpetually drawn, plunging the room into darkness. She refused to eat or drink, just sat clutching a photograph of Julian, weeping. Her sobs echoed down the hallway, mingling with the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the doors, creating a symphony of sorrow. Sometimes, late at night, Arthur would hear his mother screaming, talking to herself. At first, he thought she was just having nightmares. But one time, he peeked through her door. In the dim glow of the nightlight, he saw his mother sitting up in bed, talking to an empty corner of the room. "Is that you, Julian, my son? Why are you covered in roots? You must be so cold. Come here to mommy." Arthur froze. She said she saw Julian, standing in the corner, his body covered in roots, his eyes staring blankly at her. Arthur brought a psychiatrist to the house, but Eleanor refused to see him, even smashing a teapot and screaming that she wasn't crazy, that her son had truly come home. Mr. Vance was the opposite. The pain didn't break him, it turned him into stone. He became more taciturn and tyrannical than ever. The grief of losing his son seemed to have morphed into a silent fury. He forbade anyone in the house, which now only consisted of Arthur, from mentioning any superstitious nonsense. To him, everything had to have a logical explanation, had to be within human control. He believed Julian's death was the work of a business rival, an elaborate plot to sow fear and destroy the Vance family. Someone must have slipped some kind of poison into his drink, a powerful hallucinogen, then staged the scene, he told Arthur, his voice firm, his eyes blazing. Mr. Vance spent a great deal of money hiring private investigators from the capital to find the culprit. But all they found was a dead end. No clues, no witnesses, no evidence of human intervention. The roots remained an unsolved mystery. For Arthur, these days were a form of mental torture. He had to care for a mother sinking into madness and deal with a father blinded by stubborn denial. The scientist in him still struggled to find a rational explanation. Could Julian have died from a drug overdose, or some neurotoxin from a plant that caused powerful hallucinations? Could the roots be a type of mold, a symbiotic organism that grew rapidly on a corpse in the unique environmental conditions of the mountains? He had managed to collect a small piece of root from the bathtub before the police cleaned the scene. He hid it and secretly sent it to a laboratory at a research institute he knew in the capital, asking for an analysis. He lied, saying it was a strange plant specimen he'd found in the forest during fieldwork. He pinned his hopes on science, on a tangible answer. But deep down, his intuition whispered a different, more terrifying truth. The lullaby that night was no hallucination. Julian's death and the strange phenomena in the house were connected by some ghostly link. He remembered the driver's story, Clara's terrified face, the dying garden, and the mournful lyrics. The sacred grove is broken. The wild herbs weep. A sacred grove? The song mentioned a sacred forest that had been destroyed. What did this have to do with his family? With Serenity King? With the Vance family's wealth? Arthur began to realize that to understand what was happening, he couldn't rely on science alone. He had to use his own field of study, folklore, to conduct his own investigation. He needed to find out about this sacred grove, and more importantly, about the roots of his family's fortune. Arthur's investigation began with the oldest native elders still living in the valley. He shed his city clothes for simple attire, brought some tea and cakes, and sought out the old stilt houses hidden deep on winding trails. At first, they were very wary when they learned he was Richard Vance's son. The Vance name seemed to be associated with a sense of apprehension, if not fear. They answered his questions hesitantly, their eyes always avoiding his. But Arthur's humble attitude, his knowledge of their culture, and his fluent command of the native tongue gradually broke down their defenses. He didn't ask direct questions. He asked about old stories, about customs, about ancient ritual songs. He sat patiently listening to their tales, sharing cigarettes and cups of tea. After several days of this, he managed to meet an old man named Silas, who had been a friend of his grandfather. Silas was nearly 90, his eyes dim but his memory still sharp. He lived alone in a small stilt house next to a stream. After a few cups of tea and some small talk about the old days when his grandfather was alive, Arthur dared to probe. "Grandfather Silas, do you know of a sacred grove in this region?" Silas, who was rolling a cigarette, paused. His wrinkled, dark hands froze in midair. He took a deep drag from his cigarette, exhaled a cloud of white smoke, and then answered slowly, his voice hoarse. "There are many sacred groves. Each village has its own forbidden forest. But which one are you asking about?" "A forest. With many precious medicinal plants. And perhaps connected to a shamaness?" Arthur tried to sound as casual as possible. Silas's gaze grew distant. He looked at Arthur with a deep, knowing expression that held both pity and reproach. "You are Richard Vance's son. You should know. Or did he never tell his children about his roots?" I was sent away to school when I was young. I don't know much about what happened at home," Arthur lied, feeling his heart pound. He knew he was close to the truth. Silas sighed, a heavy sigh that carried the scent of pipe tobacco and the weight of years. It was the forest of Mother Pow. The Springwood. Mother Pow. Arthur had heard the name whispered in the stories of the elders when he was a child. A famous shamaness who could speak to spirits and cure illnesses that modern doctors couldn't touch. A legendary figure in this land. Mother Pow. What happened to her? Arthur asked, his voice trembling slightly. "She's dead," Silas replied curtly. Died almost 15 years ago. Died of a broken heart. Died because her roots were torn out. And then, Silas told the story. His voice was steady, as if reading from a painful, old history book. The springwood, which meant forest of the water's eye in the old tongue, was a small but incredibly sacred forest nestled among the limestone mountains. An underground spring flowed there, its water pure and sweet, considered by the locals to be the milk of the forest mother. Around this spring was a unique ecosystem, home to hundreds of rare medicinal herbs that grew nowhere else. Mother Pow was the chosen guardian of that forest. Her clan had watched over it for generations. She not only knew every plant and blade of grass by heart, but she also knew how to talk to them, how to harvest herbs at the right time, on the right day, to maximize their medicinal properties without harming the forest's ability to regenerate. She used these plants to heal people, never taking a single coin. If someone came for medicine, she would only accept a little rice or an egg to get by. She lived a simple life, at one with nature, the very soul of the forest. About 15 years ago, Richard Vance, then just the owner of a small herbal extract business, sought out Mother Pow. He was suffering from a liver disease that no doctor could cure. His skin was yellow as turmeric, his belly swollen. It was Mother Pow who used herbs from the springwood to save his life. She cared for him for months, day and night. During his recovery, Richard recognized the enormous commercial value of the precious herbs in her forest. He saw a gold mine right before his eyes. "Your father." Silas hesitated, his dim eyes staring into space. He used his city slicker cunning to deceive the trusting old shamaness. At first, he asked for permission to harvest a small amount of herbs, promising to pay handsomely and help the villagers build a school and roads. Mother Pow believed him. She thought he was a good man who, having been saved by her, would be grateful. But then, your father used legal documents, colluded with county officials, and turned Mother Pow's ancestral, sacred forest into a project site for his company. Arthur felt his chest tighten, as if in a vice. He couldn't breathe. The truth was more naked and cruel than anything he could have imagined. The foundation of the Vance fortune was built on deceit and betrayal. Mother Pow protested. She went to your house, knelt, and begged your father to return the forest. She said it was the land of the spirits, not for business. But he wouldn't listen. Silas continued, his voice laced with bitterness. He had his men fence off the forest and brought in machinery for exhaustive harvesting. 100-year-old medicinal trees were cut down without a second thought. The sacred spring was polluted. Mother Pow was forbidden from setting foot inside. From the day she lost the forest, she was like a lost soul. She wouldn't eat or drink, just sat in front of the fence, looking at the forest and singing. She sang the old lullabies of her people, but the words were full of grief and resentment. People said she wasn't just singing for herself, she was singing to the forest mother, telling her about the pain of the desecrated land. A few months later, they found her dead on a rock, right at the entrance to the forest. She died sitting up, her eyes wide open, staring into the woods, as if she wanted to turn to stone to guard that place forever. They said she died of exhaustion. But the old ones like us, we know she died because her spirit had already died with the forest. Silas's story hit Arthur like a sledgehammer. All the scattered pieces now fit together in a perfect, horrifying picture. The destroyed sacred grove. The mournful lullaby of a shamaness who died of a broken heart. His brother's bizarre death, with roots sprouting from his flesh. It was all connected. This wasn't a murder. This was revenge. A curse planted 15 years ago, and now, it was beginning to bear fruit. Serenity King, the famous tranquilizer, was born from the deepest anxiety and resentment of a tormented soul. The irony was sickening. Arthur returned to the villa in a state of shock. He stormed into the study, where his father was working, breaking all the rules. For the first time in his life, Arthur looked his father straight in the eye and confronted him, his voice trembling with anger and fear. "Dad! Did you seize the springwood from Mother Pow?" Richard Vance looked up, stunned by the attitude of his usually gentle, submissive son. Then his face darkened. "Who's been telling you that nonsense?" "The people in the valley." "Is it true that forest is the source of Serenity King, the foundation of all this wealth?" Arthur yelled, gesturing around the luxurious room. "So what if it is?" Mr. Vance slammed his hand on the desk and stood up, no longer hiding it. "That's business. I provide jobs for so many people. I pay taxes. That piece of land, without me, would just be a wild forest. That old woman only used it to treat a few worthless people. I turned it into gold. That's vision. Something you would never understand." "Vision? You call cheating an old shamaness who saved your life, stealing her spiritual home, vision? Do you know she died of a broken heart? That's because she was foolish and stubborn." Mr. Vance roared, his face flushing with anger. "I offered her compensation, a large sum of money, but she refused. What she needed wasn't your money." Arthur screamed back, tears welling in his eyes. "It was respect. It was her heritage. You ripped that heritage out by the roots. Don't you see? Julian's death. The haunting in this house. It's all because of a curse. Mother Pow's curse. Shut your mouth." Mr. Vance slapped Arthur across the face. The blow was so hard Arthur staggered, the corner of his mouth splitting, trickling blood. "There's no such thing as a curse. Only ignorance and superstition. You're just like them. I sent you to study in the West to develop a modern mind, not to believe in this ridiculous ghost nonsense."